Christmas. It's everyone's favorite time of year. It's a time of gift giving, spending time with your family, singing songs, and decorating your house to set a festive mood. Now, what most people don't know is that Christmas isn't actually a Christian holiday. So depending on who's arguing this, it either shouldn't be celebrated at all, Jehovah's Witnesses, or should be celebrated in a way that has all meaning stripped away from it. Now, what I'm here to tell you is that both arguments are wrong. Christmas isn't pagan, and it isn't celebrated in a pagan way. Now, an important thing to mention before we get into some arguments is that it is true that Christmas is losing its meaning. Stuff like gift giving, now more often than not, just means wasting your money on buying luxuries for yourself. Most people deny that Santa's real. Well, because he isn't. At least not how he's supposed to be. I love most things of Christmas. Christmas has unfortunately gone through an extreme amount of commercialization over the past century as society has secularized. For example, Coca-Cola reinvented a real Christian saint, Saint Nicholas, and turned him from someone who gave an incredible amount to the poor and needy into a marketing gimmick to increase their sales. Of course, this is to be expected when Christmas is celebrated by a more secular society, but what this does not mean is that the practices in Christmas are pagan, and certainly not the practices associated with traditional Christmas. Typically, when people try to prove that Christmas is pagan, they point to its origins. By proving that Christmas did not originate with Christians, and it was adopted by them, it would by default mean that Christmas is pagan. This would be an accurate assumption, but it needs to be proven. Most commonly, people point to three main festivals when pointing to Christians adopting them as Christmas. One Germanic, that being Yule, and two Roman, that being Saturnalia and the Nativity of Sol Invictus. Let's start with Yule, because that's the easiest to disprove. The oldest writings of pagans celebrating Yule come from the 8th century from an Anglo-Saxon monk, Bede the Venerable, writing about an Anglo-Saxon pagan calendar in a condemnation of said calendar. And it had the month of Yule written on it, where Yule would be. Of course, this does mean that Yule was most likely practiced before then, but this ties beautifully into my next point. The earliest recording of Christmas is in the 300s. This would also likely mean that Christmas was practiced before then too. Germanic pagans would have had little influence on the religious traditions of the Romans, and even less so on Christians who originated from the Middle East and would have had to keep their faith hidden until the legalization by Constantine the Great. There would have been an incredibly low incentive for Christians to adopt the festival of a faith outside the empire's border. Well, speaking of the empire, this leads on to the Roman festivals. Let's start with the Nativity of Sol Invictus. The Nativity of Sol Invictus is a celebration of the rebirth of the Roman sun god, which would have taken place on the 25th of December. This was a festival established by the Emperor Aurelian in 274 AD, but the earliest recording we have of Sol Invictus being celebrated on December 25th is actually in 354 AD, which is the same as for Christmas. Prior to this, the Roman sun god was actually celebrated in August, not December, and it is unknown when exactly the main celebration of the sun god shifted from August to December prior to 354. Notably, the date of August 28th is also mentioned in the same calendar, where we get Christmas and the date of December 25th from. This date, that being August 28th, shows up in earlier evidence we have for Feast Days of Sol, where the date of December 25th doesn't even show up, showing that the date of December 25th was more likely a new innovation and was less important when it came to celebrating Sol than it came to the date in August. Philip Nothaft questions whether or not the Natalis Invicti celebrations on December 25th were really so ancient, widespread, and momentous as to exert a strong influence on Christian communities in Rome and elsewhere. The festival that would have likely had much more influence on Christians would have been Saturnalia, the other Roman festival. Saturnalia was a festival that celebrated the deity of Saturn. It was a multi-day festival that spanned from December 17th to December 21st, although the length of this festival would change throughout its history. I would say that this would be the best festival for skeptics to point to, as it is far more documented than the Festival of Sol Invictus. However, due to this documentation, there is still a reason to believe that this festival is not the origin of Christmas. What I mean when I say this is that there is not a singular Christian source from the Roman Empire, that being before its legalization or after, that states that Christian authorities moved Christmas to fit in with the pagan holiday. The first Christian source that says this comes centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This also negates the fact that for Christmas to even be moved to fit in with pagans, it would be more logical to move it during Saturnalia and not a few days after it. I think the best way to highlight the fact that Christmas originates with Christians is to show why the date of December 25th was chosen. It was old Jewish belief that the holiest prophets died on the same day they were conceived, and this belief carried on to Christianity, as Christians believe that Jesus is also a prophet of God, while being God. Therefore, Christians, at least the early ones, also believe that Jesus died on the same day he was conceived. We have seen Christians try to find the date of Jesus' birth and death since the early 200s. Tertullian says that Jesus was crucified on the date of the 25th of March. Adding 9 months onto this, and voila, we get December 25th, which would be calculated to be the date that Jesus was born. We see this confirmed with people such as Hippolytus of Rome, who said that he was born on December 25th, also saying this in the early 200s. This all goes to show that early Christians likely did not care for other religions when calculating the date of Christmas. Certainly not that of Yule or Sol Invictus, which Christians would only have major contact with after the date of December 25th was chosen to be that of Jesus' birth. I'm gonna do a rapid fire round on some Christmas traditions that are called pagan too, because, people saying Christmas traditions being pagan should also mean that Christmas is therefore pagan. First, caroling is not pagan. It is dumb to assume that because pagan cultures sang during festivals, it is therefore pagan to sing in a festival. Singing, or rather chanting, has been a Christian thing since the dawn of the Mass, and Jews, famously not pagan, also sing during festivals. Second, Santa is not pagan. The modern idea of Santa is flawed. I fully agree. But the idea of a gift-giving person is Christian, originating from Saint Nicholas. The church has never taught that Santa is an obese, jolly fat man that flies on a sleigh with an army of elves. This is an idea that became popular as society became more secular in the mid-1800s. And outside of the West, most Christians don't believe in ideas such as this. For example, in Poland, it is believed that an angel, baby Jesus, or Saint Nicholas himself delivers presents, not really the fat Santa. Thirdly, the Yule log. This isn't really a universal Christmas tradition, but it is still a Christian one. Some of the earliest recorded instances we have of a Yule log would be from places you wouldn't expect if it was a Germanic pagan tradition. At first, it was documented as a Christmas log, and it was documented in places such as Italy or Croatia, far away from Germany. The first explicit mention of a Yule log comes from 1686 from an English writer, John Aubrey, describing it as a Christmas tradition and not a pagan one. Finally, the most controversial one, Christmas trees. This is because the places that Christmas trees come from did have cultures that used greenery in a religious way. However, it's important to note that Germanic cultures also used oak trees religiously. This is important to know when it comes to the origin of the Christmas tree. There are 2 origins to the Christmas tree, but neither of them make it pagan. The first origin comes from 8th century Anglo-Saxon England, when a missionary, St. Boniface, was sent to re-Christianize the land. The story goes that the local Germanic people had a local holy oak, which they dedicated to Thor. St. Boniface had threatened to cut down this oak to demonstrate that the pagan gods held no power. When St. Boniface wasn't struck down by the gods, he replaced the oak with an evergreen in its stead, dedicated to Christ. If the Christmas tree was an adoption of pagan customs, it would have made more sense to just incorporate oak trees into the Christmas celebrations, rather than outright replace it. This is not the only origin story for our humble Christmas tree, and the second, more likely, origin story makes it much less pagan. The second origin point we have is from 16th century Germany. This is centuries after Germanic paganism died out in Scandinavia, never mind in Germany itself. Martin Luther is said to have created the Christmas tree as a useful way to teach theology, where he would decorate an evergreen tree with candles to help teach the Nativity and to show the everlasting light and life of God. This practice was then spread throughout the Protestant world and was then further popularized into the rest of the Christian world. Regardless of its origin, it's most likely not a pagan one. Overall, While there is debate in this area, I think that critics of Christianity over-exaggerate, or are just simply misinformed on, the connection between paganism and traditional Christmas. A lot of this rhetoric has actually surprisingly come from fundamentalist Christian groups, or Christ-based cults such as Jehovah's Witnesses, as an attack on what they see as a corrupted faith in an attempt to draw more members. Whatever the reason for these accusations, I think it's safe to say that no, Christmas is not pagan.